All right, good morning. It is April 23rd. We have Kim McManus with us to go over for discuss their perspective on H105.
Good morning, everyone. For the record, Kim McManus, Department of State Attorneys and Sheriffs. Thank you for having us in and for fitting me in. First thing, we appreciate it. As we testified on the House side, our department supports H105. We had one issue raised on the House side that was dealt with. So the version that's in front of you now, we are satisfied with. And that was just to clarify that when a youth who had .02 civil and was in the program had a suspension while doing programs. That was something that was addressed on the House side, and that was the only issue we had over there. So just to run through a few specifics, but again, our comments are brief. We have no issue with lowering the age from 16 to 12. We appreciate what law enforcement and the diversion program folks have pointed out, that this streamlines the process, makes it less confusing for the youth and law enforcement. And again, we, as long as the suspension piece remains for those going through the program, we appreciate that there's a shortened period for youth to complete the program, but we do think that is incredibly important. The timeliness of intervening with youth who are engaging in any drinking and driving is incredibly important to our department. Youth who drink and drive are more likely to do so as adults. So the sooner we can intervene and provide education, the better, and therefore we support. So.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts? Some of the recommendations yesterday, including cannabis, the YSAS program.
So I did hear that yesterday, and unfortunately, due to the time, there's no way I could canvass my department about the feeling or the thoughts on that. I do appreciate, I believe Ms. Farrell said that she had some data that suggested that most possessions of cannabis under 16 would go to some form of diversion. I could not verify that, but I would trust Ms. Farrell reporting on that. So it would really be a policy decision for you all if you wanted to add cannabis in there.
Senator Bowles.
It's not really a question so much as a statement. It makes sense to me. We now treat cannabis under the law like we do alcohol in sort of every other place. So it seems reasonable to me that we would treat it that way here.
Yeah. Agreed.
And just to clarify, and I did reach out to Ms. Farrell yesterday, that would just be for the possession.
Yeah,
piece,
possession, not
A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Right. We're not moving into anywhere close to the driving piece. That's what we want to just make sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Then that's be a policy decision for you all. Yeah.
Would it be correct to say that you're neutral about that change? Or do you want some time to reach out to?
Yes, unfortunately, again, I heard it
Sure.
yesterday and that I did not have any time to reach out. I would imagine there's probably a variety of opinions. But again, if the only issue is possession of cannabis and there's nothing else around that behavior, I would imagine that what Ms. Farrell testified is likely very accurate. Those cases are going to some form of diversion.
So would the Senator Bruce, what are your thoughts on getting some language to include cannabis possession? Sure. The substance abuse. Okay, makes sense. I'm assuming you're on board based on what you just said. So that's great. The committee, would you be able to draft up some language for the near future just to add that in what we did with that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
As far as time.
For the time frame, I don't think so. I don't think we're on too tight of a time frame. So
Okay. So
yeah, next week.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Thank
And just for possession or?
Just for possession.
Okay.
Cool, thank you. Committee, any further questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too.
Question all from the opposite, Attorney General. We certainly support this bill. This is, I think, a really positive, bill for a lot of reasons that actually haven't been discussed yet, which, is that our laws around underage drinking, both in terms of possession, drinking, and driving while impaired, while underage, are super confusing. So confusing that I get more questions from other attorneys and even from judges who are reading the laws but don't understand them and don't understand how they actually apply. I get more what I would call colleague to colleague questions, not about a particular case, but where I have, attorneys, in Vermont who have had children who have gotten a .02 ticket and picked up the green books and tried to figure out what does this actually mean, and been unable to figure it out. I even had a judge, not a Vermont judge, but a judge from another state whose child goes to UVM, whose kid came home with a .02 ticket. She said, a couple hours trying to figure out which law. She was trying to figure out even what ticket the kid had. Like, she was trying to figure out from the ticket what law has this kid been charged under, and she couldn't figure it out. So one of the things this bill does that's just tremendous is just streamlines everything. It dumps all of our underage drinking provisions into one bucket, so they're not scattered across like 3 different green books, and basically says, here's how they all get dealt with this through this one mechanism. And that's a great thing to do, because the system that we had in place, or that we have in place now prior to this bill, it is sort of backwards, and it's backwards for good reasons, but it's backwards. Kids who are under the age of 16 get a much more sort of heavy-handed intervention. They get a citation into court for an actual offense. As kids over the age of 16 get a much lighter touch, they get a civil ticket that can be dealt with through YSAS. And really, at the end of the day, the best way to deal with all of this is through YSAS. It's a great program. It's responsive to the individual needs of the youth. And that's really what kids need, is something that's individualized and tailored. So what this bill really does is says, you know what, we're going to take a really individualized, tailored approach. We're just going to apply that across the year. Everybody gets the YSAS screening, and then they get whatever treatment is appropriate pursuant to that screening. And we do, I want to say, very much support the addition of cannabis offenses into this bill. I think it's not just a question of the fact that cannabis offenses are generally diverted anyway. It's also that a lot of these tickets are happening at the same time. A lot of kids who get picked up for drinking are also getting picked up for cannabis possession at the same time. And it doesn't make sense for us to have 2 different routes that they have to go through, because they were both drinking and possessing cannabis, which is a fairly typical combination of teenagers. It doesn't make sense to send them through 2 different routes with 2 different programs. It makes sense to send them through the same program and deal with all behaviors in the same place. So we're very supportive of that, not just because we think it should be in there, but also just because, practically speaking, it's the same clients charged in the same places, and then we send them to 2 different directions, and that just doesn't make sense.
Can you speak to, so we're talking possession only, can you speak to the broader range of cannabis offenses and whether or not you would support including those as well?
Certainly. I mean, I think that what I would support would be essentially mirroring what we've done with alcohol. So I would support including the same type of referrals and graduated suspensions for driving under the influence of alcohol that are in this bill. I would extend that to marijuana, and that would be the change I would make. I would just basically mirror the alcohol section with the marijuana provisions.
That makes sense to me.
And it otherwise goes into family court now.
Currently, if you're over 16, you get a ticket. If you're under 16, you go into family court.
For possession, but so let's say we add possession, as we were just talking about, but we don't add driving under the influence DUI drugs, that would go through family court still.
Your family
Yeah.
court is a DUI.
But it would otherwise, so, but if we make it similar to alcohol, then it would go through the YSAS program.
For the, it would for the people who are dressed, so, and it gets tricky when you're talking about marijuana, because when
Yeah.
you're talking about alcohol, you're talking about the 0.08 versus the 0.02. Whereas with marijuana, you're talking about any level of impairment across the board. So
You may not know this, but do we actually at this point in time have any legitimized way to test for cannabis impairment?
No.
Okay. So possession is really the only thing being charged.
I shouldn't say they can't test for marijuana impairment. They don't have, it's not like alcohol where they can, there's been no study that's established a benchmark that says X percentage of delta 9 THC in your bloodstream equals impairment, which they haven't been able to do with alcohol. They've been able to say pretty much across the board, if you're at 0.08, you are impaired. They have not been able to do that with marijuana, so they can test for the presence of THC in the bloodstream. They can't even test for the quantity of THC in the bloodstream. They usually don't bother doing that because the presence alone tells them all the information they're going to get, because quantity doesn't really give you any information about impairment.
Doesn't cannabis also stick around in your system a lot longer than?
It does. There's some really interesting studies. So, for example, people who smoked cannabis for a long time, and this is actually a pretty typical profile. People smoke cannabis for a while and develop some dependence or some use that they don't want to continue. They discontinue cannabis use. When they were using a lot of cannabis, they got large because you eat a lot. And then even after they've stopped smoking cannabis, it turns out that the THC, after your body processes it, it gets stored in your fat. And as you burn off that fat after you stop smoking, you can actually be testing positive for THC all the time. In fact, after you go for a run, you'll test the highs because your body's just burned a bunch of fat that contains THC. It's processed through your liver and absorbed into your bloodstream. So there's all kinds of weird variables that pop up with THC and its ability to not just sort of linger for a long time, but to sometimes even disappear and reappear if you have it in fat stores and start burning those fat stores.
So the blood test wouldn't even be indicative that someone used cannabis that day, that week, that month.
No, typically the way that that's proven is with typically the way that it's proven is because our clients admit it. But other than that, it's through the use of drug recognition experts who can testify about the physical signs of impairment that are associated with marijuana use, which are pretty, there's certain of them that are pretty definitive.
I always thought drug recognition experts were well oversold.
Whenever I have a case with a drug recognition expert, you can actually look up their records. So you can get every time they do a DRE evaluation and there is then a test, then you can check and see how accurate they were, and they range. There's some who are really good and some who aren't, and we certainly use their accuracy as a measure of credibility in court.
Yeah, I kind of share your skepticism. You know, we've seen sort of sciences that are supposed to predict behavior and predict, throughout history, and generally they're wishy-washy.
And they are, to the extent that there are weaknesses, we certainly bring those forward.
As is your job.
I thought that was pretty good DRE, but but anyways,
My mom also thought she was pretty good.
As did mine.
Nothing, that's the point. My mom's like, I can tell.
any further questions or comments for Marshall? Okay, thank you. Alright, so that's it for today for just that bill. I think the Senator Matos, before he came in, we were talking about adding cannabis possession for people under 16 go to this YSAS program rather than having them go through the burdensome process of going to family court. Family court is, in my opinion, it would be more punitive than going through the YSAS program, which it just seems, at least in my opinion, it's a little contradictory to have, people over 16 getting the easier path out of this versus the kid under 16 going through a much more court heavy process. So trying to streamline it and talk about adding possessions. We're going to get some language for that next week. And I think we're still in the discussion as to whether or not we want to include DUI drugs. So if somebody under 16 is driving after they smoke, whether they go to family court or the YSAS program. So I think that's still part of the conversation.
Gotcha. I think if they're driving under 16, so they don't have any license or permit or, right?
Yeah, I mean, they could have a junior learner's permit if they're 15.
I suppose, but we're talking 12 and up,
Right.
right?
So
So
yeah,
if
they wouldn't
someone's
have any.
13 and they're driving and they're high, I think we need a major intervention there.
Probably not. And they could still have a pretty significant intervention through YSAS if that's what's evaluated as needed. It just doesn't have to go through the court process.
And Senator Madhouse, to your question, if I recall in the House, there's testimony that I think it does, but it's very infrequent. Most of the issues are around the age of 16 for the impaired aspect.
Are there any witnesses that run the YSAS program or any witnesses there that we could reach out to? Does anyone know of any?
No, but you'd think that I would, given that this is like the eighth group of people that I work with, but off the top of my head, I don't. I can dig around in my brain a little.
It's a DOH program type of thing. I could speak to Willa Farrell and see if she has any contacts.
Yeah, if you don't mind, that would be great. And maybe we can have them come in on the day that you come in with the amendment
Sure.
and just take it from there. Thank you. And if you could also let Will know, whoever she recommends.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Okay. That's it for one.
I just think it's a bad acronym.
YSAS.
It sounds like YVAX.
I don't like it.
And given the population you're dealing with, it just doesn't.
But that's why I kind of like it.
So we can come back at 9:30 and we'll be taking up H 342. Passing over 44 for now.